Language is the air that ideas breathe. It is invisible, omnipresent, and so essential to our existence that we rarely stop to ask how it shapes who we are. But what if I told you that the words we use don't just describe the world? They create it. That the limits of our language are the limits of our universe. This is an idea that the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein explored with a depth that still shakes us today. His thinking, divided into two radically distinct stages, invites us to question not only how we speak, but how we think, how we feel, and how we exist in a world that is, to a large extent, built by words. In his first stage, Wittgenstein presents an almost mathematical view of language, proposing that language is a mirror of reality. Every word, every sentence, is like a map that reflects the facts of the world. But this mirror has cracks. Wittgenstein warns us that there are things language cannot capture. The ethical, the mystical, the deeply personal, everything that cannot be reduced to facts, lies beyond its reach. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. He tells us, with a solemnity that echoes into an infinite void. This idea is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating, because it reminds us that there are experiences that transcend words. Terrifying, because it confronts us with the possibility that there are aspects of our existence we may never fully share or even understand, not even within ourselves. But Wittgenstein didn't stop there. Over time, his thinking took a radical turn. In his second stage, represented by philosophical investigations, language is no longer a cold, static mirror, but a living, dynamic game, full of nuances and surprises. Here, words don't have fixed meanings. Their sense emerges from how we use them in specific contexts. Imagine language as a toolbox. A hammer isn't just a hammer. It depends on whether you use it to drive a nail or crack a nut. Similarly, words acquire their meaning in the game of everyday life. But this game isn't individual, it's collective. It depends on the rules we share, on the social practices that unite us. And this is where language limits us in a subtler, yet equally powerful way. Think about how we talk about love. The word love can mean completely different things depending on who says it, to whom it's said, and in what context. For a poet, love might be a cosmic force that moves the stars. For a scientist, it might be a series of chemical reactions in the brain. For a child, it might be their mother's embrace. Each of these meanings is valid, but none captures the totality of what love is. And here lies the paradox. Language allows us to speak of love, but at the same time, it prevents us from fully defining it. It gives us words, but it also takes away the possibility of exhausting their meaning. It's as if we were trying to catch the wind with our hands. We feel its presence, but we can never hold it completely. This limitation isn't just philosophical, it's deeply emotional. How many times have you felt something so intense that you couldn't find the words to describe it? How many times have you wanted to express your pain, your joy, your awe, and found yourself silent, not for lack of will, but for lack of vocabulary? Wittgenstein reminds us that these experiences aren't failures on our part, but inherent features of language. Silence, in these cases, isn't defeat, it's an acknowledgement that there's something beyond words. And perhaps, in that silence, we find a deeper connection with ourselves and with others. But language doesn't just limit what we can express, it also limits what we can think. Wittgenstein teaches us that our ideas are conditioned by the linguistic structures we use. Consider how different cultures have words for concepts that don't exist in other languages. In German, for example, there's the word Schadenfreude, which describes the pleasure derived from another's suffering. In Spanish, there's no equivalent word, suggesting that this emotion doesn't occupy the same place in our culture. Similarly, in Japanese, there's the term wabi-sabi, which refers to the beauty of imperfection, transience, and incompleteness. These words aren't just labels, they're windows into ways of seeing the world that may be inaccessible to those who don't have them in their language. Thus, language doesn't just reflect our reality, it also constructs it, and in doing so, opens some doors while closing others. And here we come to one of Wittgenstein's most provocative ideas, the impossibility of a private language. In philosophical investigations, he argues that the meaning of words cannot be entirely personal. We need a shared context, a social agreement, for words to make sense. This means that even our most intimate experiences, those we feel are unique and ineffable, are, in some way, mediated by the language we share with others. We can't fully escape the linguistic structures that surround us. This can feel like a prison, but also like a bridge. Because while language limits us, it also connects us. It allows us to share, however imperfectly, what makes us human. Wittgenstein invites us to be aware of these limitations, not to frustrate us, but to liberate us. By recognizing that language isn't perfect, that it can't capture everything we are, we give ourselves permission to explore other forms of expression. Art, music, even silence itself, become tools for saying what words cannot. And at the same time, we become more humble in our use of language. We learn to listen not just to the words, but to the spaces between them, to the gestures, the tones of voice, everything that can't be reduced to a dictionary. But there's more. Wittgenstein reminds us that language isn't just a tool for describing the world, it's also a way of acting in it. When we say "I love you," we're not just describing a feeling, we're making a promise, creating a bond, transforming our relationship with the other. Words aren't inert, they have the power to change the world. And this leads us to a responsibility. If language is so powerful, then we must use it carefully, intentionally, and respectfully. Because every word we say, every sentence we construct, is contributing to the reality we share. Ultimately, what Wittgenstein teaches us is that language is both a gift and a challenge. It's a gift because it allows us to connect, to create, to dream. It's a challenge because it demands that we be aware of its limits, its traps, and its possibilities. And perhaps, in that tension between what we can say and what we cannot say, we find something profoundly human, the capacity to marvel at the mystery of our own existence. So the next time you speak, listen, write, or fall silent, remember that you're participating in something much larger than yourself. You're playing a game that has rules, but also room for creativity. You're using a tool that limits you, but also sets you free. And in that balance, in that dance between silence and words, you find not only the limits of your language, but also the horizon of your thought. And who knows? Perhaps on that horizon, you'll find something you've never seen before, a new way of being, of understanding, of existing. Here are 5 practical tips to prevent language from hindering your growth, with examples illustrating how to apply them in daily life. The first tip is to develop linguistic self-awareness through constant observation of your words. Pay attention to how you express yourself, both aloud and in your internal dialogue. Do you use phrases like "I'll never be able to do this" or "I always mess up"? These expressions not only reflect a defeatist mindset but also reinforce it. For example, if you catch yourself saying, "I'm not good with numbers," try reframing it. "I'm still developing my skills with numbers, but I'm improving." This small change can open you up to new possibilities and motivate you to keep learning. Second, learn to question and redefine the labels you place on yourself and others. Labels are linguistic shortcuts that simplify reality, but they can also limit our perception. For example, if you define yourself as a shy person, you're likely to avoid social situations because you believe you don't fit in. Instead, try saying, "Sometimes I feel uncomfortable in social situations, but I'm working on feeling more confident." This approach allows you to acknowledge your challenges without letting them define you entirely. Similarly, avoid rigidly labeling others, such as "he's selfish" or "she's disorganized." Instead, describe specific behaviors. Sometimes he acts selfishly, or, at times, she struggles with organization. This helps you see people in a more flexible and compassionate way. Third, expand your vocabulary to express emotions and experiences with greater precision. Often, we feel stuck because we lack the right words to describe what we're going through. For example, instead of simply saying, "I'm stressed," you might explore whether what you're feeling is anxiety, frustration, overwhelm, or exhaustion. Each of these emotions has different nuances, and by identifying them, you can address them more effectively. If you're feeling overwhelmed at work, instead of saying, "I can't handle everything," you might say, "I need to prioritize my tasks because I have too many responsibilities right now." This level of precision not only helps you understand yourself better but also improves communication with others. Fourth, practice using solution-oriented language rather than problem-focused language. When faced with challenges, it's easy to fall into negative language that amplifies the difficulty. For example, instead of saying, "This project is a disaster," you could say, "This project has some challenges, but I'm looking for ways to solve them." This shift in focus not only reduces feelings of helplessness but also motivates you to actively seek solutions. In your personal life, if you find yourself saying, "I never have time for myself," you might reframe it as, "I need to reorganize my schedule to make more time for my interests." This small adjustment puts you in a position of control and action. Finally, cultivate language that fosters curiosity and open-mindedness. Instead of using absolute statements like, "This is impossible," or "That's just how things are," adopt a more inquisitive tone. For example, if you encounter a new idea that makes you uncomfortable, instead of saying, "This doesn't make sense," you might ask, "What can I learn from this perspective?" Or, if someone has a different opinion, instead of saying, "You're wrong," you might say, "I'm interested in understanding why you think that way." This approach not only enriches your conversations but also helps you grow by exposing you to new ideas and viewpoints.